So CIA, not Central Intelligence Agency, but something totally different.
Okay.
C stands for control, I stands for influence, and A stands for accept. So control the controllables, influence what you can, and accept the rest.
JQ, what's up? This is Bailey, and I am coming to you from Short and Sweet, a Donut Princess podcast. I'm really, really lucky to have Jay here. Actually was on his podcast a few weeks ago, so you got to check it out. He dives into a little bit about my story, but of course, I want to learn about his story, and I want to share that with you guys. So thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you, Jay, for being here.
Yeah, stoked to be here. Psyched.
Okay, so I met you through the Asian Hustler Network, and I loved how quick you were to scheduling and how efficient you were. And I think right off the bat, I was like, dude, like I want to kind of share that with people. And you have your own podcast too. Do you want to tell people what your podcast is about?
Yeah, it's called Millennials with Machetes, and it tackles one big question. How are millennials hacking their way through the thick of life? And so we dig a lot into real stories, normal everyday people, in terms of how they're, not only hustling, but also trying to shift and tackle obstacles in their life one by one. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's super relevant because there's not really even like that, like an example of what that looks like for millennials. Like there's no like millennial product child of like somebody we're looking forward to understanding and knowing. So it's great that you're sharing all these stories about millennials. And one important thing that I remember when we were recording was you explore vulnerability and grit.
Mm-hmm.
Who has been your favorite guest and why?
Yeah, gosh, I think I just finished recording an episode with Maddie. She's a coworker of mine, and her and I explore what it was like over the past year to deal with her sister's suicide. And I think that's like something that people, we don't really talk about ever. And for me, as someone who's never experienced that firsthand, it's like, how do you even show up for friends during that time, right? So we dig into that, and then we kind of go back and forth in a few episodes between that being like one end of the serious and raw, vulnerable spectrum, but then also the passionate side. So I also interview this guy Blake, who a buddy of mine. He decides to create his own video game. And spend 6 years doing 2 games. So as a gamer, I know you game quite a bit. Yeah. So he dumps 6 years into creating these 2 games, and we talk about what it's like to come out on the other side of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really great. I mean, I'm starting out very newly on my podcast journey, and just like, I don't know, when I hear the story of people that I choose to have and just doing some light research or just hopping on a call with them, like, I think it's really awesome to create these relationships with them and just to see like what people aren't really talking about. And you really, for you with vulnerability and grit, like you're really diving in and you're really like, I mean, it can be kind of confronting as well to talk about things like suicide, just out of the break of the day, like, and react to it.
It's like, whoa, that became real.
Yeah, exactly. So I really like how you chose vulnerability and grit. And what other traits do you think naturally comes with the vulnerability and grit that people have as they're sharing these stories with you on your podcast?
Yeah, I think part of what drives a lot of it is drive itself in terms of motivation and where people come from. Because I think when you deal with loss or trauma in any way, people either like roll over and let life kind of smack them upside the head, and or you have the other side where people get hit by trauma and they're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to deal with it and I'm going to work through this to figure it out. Not always having the answers either. An outcome of that is leadership. Right. Mm-hmm. When you think about people being values-based, and learning how to lead from whatever position they're in. Not always a position of strength either. That's really cool to me, at least.
Yeah, and also just understanding that it doesn't happen right away. Like it could be almost years later when you actually realize and you have that passion and that drive that creates them to go and create other things in the world.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
So I know that you work at Deloitte as a consultant. So tell me a little bit about the company and what it's like to be in corporate. I think all that I really know about it is that there's offices all over the world. But I'm very curious because, nowadays, especially with COVID-19 and this whole idea of like, what is work, and does work mean you have to really go in now? I guess, now it's kind of an interesting discussion. It's like, well, there's plenty of people working right now, working from home. And I know that consultants often do. So tell me a little bit about what it's like to work for Deloitte and what it's like to be in corporate, because that's also something I don't really have that much experience with.
Well, at a high level, it's funny that you bring up work. I'm part of the human capital practice at Deloitte. And what we do is we look at the future of work and what that looks like. So you hit on it exactly. Score. Overall, broadly, we deal with three main things in terms of what we consult businesses on and organizations to that point. So it could be governments as well. But primarily it's people, it's process, and it's technology. Right. So how do people work? How do we make them better at their jobs, but also enable them to find fulfillment in what they do? Right.
Yeah.
How do we streamline processes to make people work more effectively and efficiently? And then from a technology piece, how does technology disrupt the way we do things? As we were talking about Zoom a few seconds, like right before we started recording, and that's been pretty new over the past few years too. Right. So yeah, people, process, and technology.
So you said a word there that it really resonates with me, and that's the word of fulfillment. So I know, especially within these past years of me having friends in corporate, understanding that there are things that are put out by the company to provide fulfillment, which could be, like making sure it's a good work-life balance, adding all these extra activities and things to do with each other on the weekends or even during the day, happy hours, etc. What do you think is the most effective in creating fulfillment for people?
Yeah, this is where it kind of gets a bit dicey, but
well, give it to me. Give me the diciness.
Oftentimes when you think about what consultants do with people, sometimes it can be misconstrued as like restructuring. I don't know if you've seen Up in the Air with George Clooney. Back in like 2005, but that's basically my job.
Okay.
But not always, right? So sometimes we reduce the size of companies because it just doesn't make sense. But oftentimes we try to automate repetitive and boring tasks. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like imagine you had to do paperwork all day. You're a business owner, right?
Yeah.
So what we do is we try to see where we can automate a lot of that so that humans don't have to do that. And then we try to leverage technology to give us the space to work on jobs and activities that really tweak or like engage the human brain, right? Where you're problem solving. And that's what humans are really good at. It's solving problems that we don't know the answers to, but we know that we can kind of figure it out. So when you're asking about fulfillment, a lot of it is, how do I lose track of time and get myself into a flow state where the problem in front of me is so engaging that everything else disappears into the background.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
So when you think about DK's Donuts or Donut Princess LA, when you're creating these concepts from your head, right?
Yeah.
You must get lost in, oh my gosh, like how do I create this next new cronut, right? Or whatever it is. And so like that kind of fulfillment, I think, is available across organizations, regardless of what job you're in.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, when you kind of put it in that regard, if I'm trying to create a product or something that I want to make a huge impact, what's fulfilling for me is to see the intention of that product happen. So for me, it's okay. I created, for example, these extra custom things about donuts that now it's like a very trendy and expressive way to show an emotion that you're feeling.
Right.
So we have these letter donuts, that spell out messages like happy birthday or like I miss you or I love you or I'm sorry. We have these donut bouquets that are beautifully arranged as like a flower bouquet, but it's actually donuts that you can eat and share. And we have these Texas sized donuts. So like I've really taken this whole like nostalgic idea of what donuts can be and turned them into personalized messages.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen from that, what's fulfilling for me is to when I open the door or when that person gets the package, they are so like consumed by it and happy. And there's so much of like thoughtfulness and gratefulness and happiness associated with it on top of it being like an amazing donut. That's what I feel fulfilled by. But I'm also very hands-on. So from a
Mm-hmm.
corporate standpoint, to feel fulfillment, like when I think of corporate, I think of somebody like on their desk, taking
Yeah.
meetings,
Yeah.
meeting deadlines, and representing a brand that's very large or bigger than, a small business. And so I don't know, like, would you say out of those three things, you said people, process, and what was the other one?
Technology.
Technology. Would
Mm-hmm.
you say that fulfillment is something that you're constantly trying to explore with people? Is it more of like my outsider view in of like, how do these corporate people find fulfillment?
Yeah.
Do you have something to kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, to be honest, I think a lot of companies that we step into, they don't like, or just people when I talk to friends, they're like, my job's kind of boring. I
Yeah.
work corporate and it's kind of, I'm not really
Yeah.
doing a lot, and I just have to do a lot of like overtime, and it just sucks. And there's this very like blehness feeling to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like that comes down to attitude and how you perceive your job, right? Um, I used to work back in sales and back in the day, and part of one way you could see it is, oh, Jay's just working in sales, and he's just hustling to drive and hit that quota.
Hmm.
The other way you could see it is, how do I get creative and fulfilled by creating presentations that are more fun than the normal everyday presentations that I would get super bored about, you know?
Yeah.
So taking that ownership and having that attitude of, oh, how could I make this my own? Is I think the piece that a lot of people are like, well, I could, but I don't get paid enough. And so there's this like
Mm.
shoving it to the side, like that's not really my space or
Yeah.
responsibility. So I'm in a corporate job. I think that's definitely one way to see it, but it's not the only way.
Yeah. And I feel that like, it's always this thing of like, am I just going to do the bare minimum or am I just going to go above and beyond? And to get to people from here to there, it's
Mm-hmm.
a big leap and it's a big jump. And I don't know if there's anybody listening right now that works in corporate that kind of feels the same way. I mean, what would you kind of recommend to have on people on how to get from here to here?
Yeah,
Like, how do you go from like, oh, like my job is boring and I'm going to put the bare minimum into fulfillment, like gonna make it my own.
right. I think for those who are selfishly motivated, right, that's probably like the best example where people who do tweak things with their own flavor,
Yeah.
they stick out really well and really quickly, because it's like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, John did you see what John did? He
Yeah.
did this for our normal standard meeting, and normally it's so boring, but he did that. And so when people actually make an effort, it doesn't actually have to be that big, but
Yeah.
they
It
they
can even
really
just be bringing donuts in the office, which I see all the time.
exactly. You could be the donut person, right? They're like, oh
Yeah.
shoot, John's bringing in donuts again. Exactly. I think to what was your question again? I had a point and then I forgot it.
My question was like, how do you bring people from here to here with the whole corporate grind, but also trying
Mm-hmm.
to help them find fulfillment? Like, are there anything that
Yeah.
people can do on a personal level to really achieve that, where they can think like, oh, I do matter, or like for them to make that extra step? What are
Yeah.
some things, what are some pieces of advice that you can give these people who might want to make that contribution, but they don't really feel like it?
Yeah. I think it's an
Yeah.
iteration of like, we talk about agile a lot in my chain
Hmm.
of work, and that's like being quick to adapt and iterate.
Yeah.
Um, we live in a world today where you can go from idea to execution so quickly,
So
right?
quickly.
You think about our podcasts, both of ours, we launched
Yeah.
start of this year, and bing, bang, boom, we're going, we're running, right? I've
Yeah.
got like 16 episodes lined up, and really all it is me making an effort. And now I'm like, I run my own podcast,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's effort, you know? And
Effort.
so it's
Okay.
like, are you executing on your ideas? Or are you like, it'd be nice, but I'm just going to sit here and,
Yeah.
lament in my life.
Yeah. And I think another thing too that has really helped me is accountability. Like tell somebody who is super accountable and have them hold you accountable to do it. That's kind of how I got my podcast started. Is honestly, my two friends and I were at my friend's birthday at a bar, and he goes, "When are you going to start this podcast?" And I was like, we're about to take the shot, and I was like, if you send me a Google Calendar invite, I'll do it.
Nice. That's how it started.
And that's my structure. And I was like,
Yeah.
if you guys can just hold me accountable, like I will go and do it. I just need the light shown in the direction I'm supposed to go. So
That's
that's
crazy.
a case in point.
If your episode gets played more than 50 times in a month, you're automatically in the top 50% of podcast shows.
Oh, wow.
Obviously then it scales up pretty quickly, where like, if you want to be in the top 1%, you have to have like 400,000 downloads per month. But to get to the top 50%, it's actually very doable very quickly.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And so it's just executing on ideas, and then trusting your friends and family to be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Check it out. Come support me. But you don't need a lot of finances to jump into that. You don't need a lot of things to hold you back from executing on ideas nowadays, which is kind of fun.
Yeah. And especially ideas like what you were saying before, like from the point of an idea going all the way to execution, like that's kind of how I did the Lunchboxes for Love concept. And we've probably raised enough we've probably done now around 600 meals.
Wow.
Just within a 2-week launch. And we've prepared, delivered personally, and made that impact in just a short 2 weeks. So I think out of this quarantine, especially, there's not really an excuse. I mean, yes, it's great to watch Netflix and chill, because I feel like a lot of people haven't done that in a minute. But if there's an idea that you find fulfilling, or you just think you can't get there, go out and ask somebody to hold you accountable. Somebody who must be themselves accountable themselves to hold you accountable. But I definitely agree that, ideas, execution, the process of it all happening, it's so quick now.
And I think it really speaks to your, what you're talking about with the accountability, is being surrounded by a group of people that will lift you up and elevate with you, Yes, you're elevating yourself, but they'll kind of be there to support you as you do that. So cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And so going back to this fulfillment question, because this is always a burning question for me.
Let's do it.
What makes you fulfilled to be a consultant or to work for Deloitte?
I think it's along very similar lines, to be frank. It's ideation, right? So I go through a very consistent cycle of what I do on a daily basis. Part of it is finding out what's wrong, right? Going through the current state of how are things working today? What are you dealing with? And that's a lot of interview based engagements, which I now do with my podcast too. So interviewing and asking good questions is important. That's one piece of it. And then it's the phase I like to call bang my head against a wall, where now I have a sense of what's going on, and I have to try to solution that. And oftentimes a lot of that is co-creation, where you shift from trying to solve the problem to just sitting down with everyone involved and saying, okay, here's where we think you could go, right? What are your thoughts on that? And so it's building this partnership of everyone. And then finally, the last stage is kind of like sharing back, right? So you go from ideation to problem solving to co-creation of what the solution is, and then sharing back with everyone. So that's like a presentation piece of, oh, here are my thoughts, or here are our findings, and here are our findings. And that cycle continues. And what I love
Yeah.
about that is, for me, as a creative, I can get creative about what my solutions are. I can get creative about what my presentations are, right?
Yeah.
And then I can choose how to share that in a way that makes the most sense to someone else. And I think what's on the line is, why it matters so much is, if it doesn't get implemented, I've just wasted all my time on that project,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and we spend a lot of time on projects, but
Yeah.
if it does get implemented and that impact is there, that'll continue long after I'm gone.
Yes.
And
It's a
that's cool.
legacy.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's super cool. I mean, yeah, I feel like I've encountered some consultants in my life, friends that are consultants, and they just love what they do. They love, and I think the word here is the impact that they can make on an individual, on an organization, on a business. Like, that's why they're really in the name of the game. And I know, I just kind of know that there are the consultants that don't work in the corporate world, but they have their clients on the side.
Right.
And for you, I mean, have you ever gotten somebody who's been just like the worst, like won't do anything that you're kind of recommending, or just not giving way? Or is there like a point where you can say, oh, sorry, like we don't want you as a client? Is like, how does that conversation look like?
Yeah. I think I think a lot of it is about, for anyone in sales, a lot of it is the qualification piece, right? How do you qualify your clients before you actually go into the room with them to work out a project, right?
Yeah.
And so what you're doing up front is you're qualifying what the problem is, so that you can define the scope of what you're working on really clearly. And normally, if that's the case, you would try to avoid any mishaps where it's like, oh, I don't want to do what you want to do. And we'll try to avoid situations where they're just kind of telling us to do something for the sake of recommending an answer that they already had kind of had in their head, and they just want us to say it. We'll kind of avoid those as well. So
yeah, and I think there is a form of like transparency that you have to have being on either side as well. Like, just being very honest and genuine about what is realistically doable versus something that you don't feel comfortable with doing as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Well, before you did corporate, do you want to tell me a little bit about what you used to do before? And yeah, let our viewers know what you used to do before corporate.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. And out of curiosity, are you curious about the Cartwheel project piece, the schooling piece? What? Yeah, is that where?
What actually caught my attention is the selling books door to door thing. So let's
okay.
dive into that. Yeah.
Oh, all right. So I'm in college. I'm in my first year of university, and my best friend from high school, he's like, "Hey, do you want to go sell books with me door to door to pay for tuition?" And I'm like, "Hell no, that sounds crazy. Why would I ever do that?" So he went out for one summer, and he made about like $12,000 in one summer.
Wow.
And I was a personal trainer at the time. Like, I know I don't look it now, super skinny, but I had also had my own business back at the time, like selling personal training sessions to clients, right?
Yeah.
I didn't make anywhere close to what he did. And so I was like, okay, let's try this out. So the second year I went out and I made about the same amount that he did, which was super exciting. And I paid for tuition that semester.
Okay.
And so I didn't come from a lot of money, but seeing that kind of started to shift my mindset about what I was capable of doing. And so over the next 4 years, I think cumulatively, sales weren't stagnant. They actually grew pretty exponentially. So the longer I stayed in my job, the better I did. I ended up with about $100,000 in total revenue over that course of the 4 years for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then dumped that all into school. So that actually paid my way not only for tuition, but also for residence, right? Because I lived there, and food throughout the year. And I got to travel, which is kind of fun. But it sucked. I'll be honest. I worked 80 hours a week. Yeah. In the rain, sometimes in the snow, because up here in Canada, we've got snow too during May. And so that's a little bit about my summers selling books during college.
Oh, that's really crazy because I mean, obviously this is before Amazon, right? You're like,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
before Amazon.
Hmm.
And I think that like there's this misconception, I think once you're successful, that there hasn't been like all these little things that you have to do along the way to get there. And for you, I feel like one of the things is selling books no matter if it's rain or shine. And I can totally agree with you or understand because when I deliver donuts
Hmm.
personally for these certain occasions, it was like pouring, like for lunchboxes for love last week. Thank God we don't have snow, but I
Hmm.
was at USC and it was pouring rain, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh, like making sure, like these
You're like,
things
don't
aren't
get the donuts
damaged.
wet. Yeah.
Yeah, like just try to make sure and navigate. But yeah, there are a lot of like not that glamorous things about your road to success, about anybody's road to success, and they're definitely not things to be ashamed of. If anything, there are things to highlight,
Hmm.
especially when coming up with this, when you're branding yourself and when you're thinking of, okay, what, like, how do I tell my story? Where should
Mm.
I begin? And I think some of the best beginnings are stories like this, where it's like, I used to like sell books in the rain and like, and it's great
Yeah.
that was like such a cool way for you to pay for college too.
Yeah, it's
I'm sure your
interesting that
parents
you
are happy.
you saw that correlation because I actually hadn't thought about that in a while. But part of the reason grit is in my podcast description is because grit is kind of like trudging through the toughness, and you'll kind of see a theme through with me too, where it's like, okay, how do we get through this to become stronger,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
I was
so
gonna ask, is that kind of like the first time you realize like you're a hustler?
Man, no, I think the first time was back in grade five selling Pokemon cards for
You
an
too.
upmarket.
Yes,
But
the Charizards for sure.
yeah, but I think it was the first time where I think it really highlighted something called character. And so what we used to call 0 days, right? 0 days would be like where you'd go out, work 12 hours, 13 hours in a day, and not sell anything.
Yeah.
We'd call those character building days. And
Yes.
the cynical people would be like, "Oh yeah, sure." Basically, it meant you sucked all day. I'm like, "Yeah, true." But it also developed this character piece where it was like, when things get hard, I'm not someone who then I can choose. Actually, I have a choice to quit or to keep going, right? And so some days I quit because I was like, you know what, this rain is too hard, it's too cold, I can't do it. But other days where I would just be like, nah, you know what, I'm gonna develop myself and try to work through this, even if there are weak points where I stumble.
And I
So
think that's something so fascinating about being human, like that you can have days where you're like so driven and so into it. And there are days where you just go, I'm done, I don't want to
yeah,
do it. And you're right, like this whole character building thing. And I think as humans, we really dive into different situations throughout our whole life. And there are so many like building blocks to kind of contribute to the character. And like you said, like you went through that grit, you went through that vulnerability. And another thing that I think that is super vulnerable, and one of the things of why I'm inspired by you is your cartwheel challenge. So do you think that you could, tell me a little bit about that? Because this was kind of done before all these other weird, crazy challenges that we have
yeah,
nowadays. Like yesterday, somebody challenged me to do 25 push-ups for like 25 days, and
yeah.
there's all these dance challenges. But I think that there's a really unique story behind the cartwheel challenge. So tell me a little about that.
Cool. In order to tell you about the Cartwheel project, I kind of have to take a bit of a step back, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I have a background of surviving cancer, and so I've been diagnosed with retinoblastoma. I'm actually blind in one eye, in my left eye. And as a kid, when I was 15, a tumor came back, and I was like, "Ah, shit, the tumor's back." But there was
Yeah.
this moment where I was in the hospital, and I'm in this ridiculous blue hospital gown, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have to operate on my only good eye. And it's this choice of like, or it's not a choice. It wasn't a choice. It was like, if I wake up, I might wake up blind. And at
Yeah.
that moment, the only
Scary.
thing that I wanted to do was see the world, you know?
Yeah.
So I made a commitment to myself and a bit of bargaining too. I was like, dear God, if you're there, I'm like, please let
We
me
always
have my
we always bargain with God during times like these.
exactly. And I was like, let let me have my vision and I'll make the most out of it like you won't believe. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that was God, but I'm pretty sure he was like, there's a bit of grace there. And
Yeah.
since then, I'm looking at you now. I can see,
Yeah.
but I've traveled to about 33 countries in my 30 years of life on Earth, and throughout that, I was like, everyone kind of travels. How cool would
Yeah.
it be if a cartwheel, which is a symbol of joy, a symbol of youth and childhood, right?
Mhm.
What if people just started cartwheeling across landmarks? So I started doing it. A few of my friends started doing it. And I was like, hey, why don't we start inviting other people to join us in this? So we started raising money for the BC Cancer Agency, which is British Columbia. It's a
Yeah.
local cancer agency that actually helped me out a lot when I was a kid, through surgeries, etc. And we just started raising money for every picture that people would post. So we got pictures from Norway, pictures from Rome, pictures from like you
Wow.
name it, like in front of the Eiffel Tower. And it started off with just me, but then what I love about it is that it became so much more. We had a kid like that was 8 years old do a cartwheel in Norway and send that, and her mom sent it to us, and she's like, this is such a great idea. I don't even know how she found out about it, but it was so great. Like, and it's crazy how much connection the internet has kind of led to us doing that, because that was back in 2010. But
Yeah. Was Instagram even like big back then?
I don't think I even had Instagram back then. It was
Yeah. How did they find you?
actually, no, sorry, it was early days of Instagram, because I
I
think
really
it
did
was
Instagram. Okay.
I did the project on Instagram. So that was like early days of like tagging, posting that. Yeah. So
What was your favorite spot to visit, or your favorite cartwheel picture?
thanks so much for asking that. It was in Athens in Greece. There's the
Okay.
Parthenon, right? Which
Yes.
was like the big stone
I've been
temple.
there. Hmm.
And I did it, and I quickly had my fiance at the time. I was like, "Hey, quick, take this picture," and she does. And this security guard like runs up immediately, and he's like, "Man, you can't cartwheel here." He's like, "Delete that picture." I'm like, "Come on, man!" I'm like, "Everyone here is taking pictures of the Parthenon. I think it's okay if I take a cartwheel in front of it." So anyway, I lied to him, told him I deleted it. I didn't.
You
Posted
did
that on Instagram, and now it's my favorite picture.
it. Pixar, you didn't do it right. I mean, we all know why he didn't want you to do the cartwheel. I'm sure if you shared with him, like, hey, it's for this thing, like
It's
maybe
for
he would have
cancer. I
changed.
swear it's okay. It's for a good cause.
Yeah. Well, I think something that I also noticed about your whole project is that, by creating that project, I bet you didn't think that you could inspire other people by creating just that project for that first project. Did you know that? Did you know that
Not at
was going to
all.
happen?
I think I was really scared at the time,
Yeah.
because it was something that was personal, and I hadn't really talked about
Yeah.
cancer before that with a lot of my friends. And,
Yeah.
I guess it was like, in a way, my coming out like party of like, here's my cancer story,
Yes.
where after that, because I was vulnerable with it, so many people then leaned into this idea of like, hey, I don't like, my mom had cancer, and my brother has cancer, like, and there, it was a way for me to start to connect more with the people that I cared about. And so for me, it really like shifted my perspective in terms of, maybe it's not something that I have to hide, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so here we are. Video recording. Video, that's not a word. Video recording. Yeah, which I think I would have been really self-conscious about years ago, but not anymore,
Well,
So
kudos to you for like really stepping up and agreeing to do video. I know people aren't really that like happy when I say that I want them to be on video too, but I really like, I think that the vulnerability aspect, and it makes so much sense now, tying it back to your podcast, it's like vulnerability and grit. Like these are
Mhm.
things that you have constantly dealt with and what people are continuing to deal with. And it shows up everywhere, personal, like at
Yeah.
work, whatever it may be. And something to do to deal with that is to create the project. And so I know that there are some people listening who wish that they could create their own project. what's some advice that you could give them here?
Yeah. So rather than give you a cliche about following your passions and just starting to do action.
Yeah, no. We don't do that here. We want the nitty gritty,
Yeah.
like.
I'll give it to you real.
Yeah, give it to me real.
Have you heard about the CIA framework?
No.
So CIA, not Central Intelligence Agency, but something totally different.
Okay.
C stands for control, I stands for influence, and A stands for accept. So control the controllables, influence what you can, and accept the rest. And that's one framework that I think can completely change my perspective in terms of if I'm controlling what I can and doing what I can with actions, right? Mm-hmm. There's no regret afterwards at the end of the day. Because if it sucked, it sucked, you know? And the second part is influence. So it's like, there's actually a very small percentage of things within our daily lives that we actually can control. You think about COVID now, it's completely wiped out everything. We can't really control that, right? Well, we can control by staying at home. So that's the controllable. Yes. The influence is like what you're doing with lunchboxes with love, right? It's like you're influencing what you can and controlling what you can by sharing that with the world. And that's making an impact as well. And then for everything else that you can't control or influence, you accept it, right? And you leave it up to God. Because what are you going to do? Like cure Corona by yourself? Probably not, right? So CIA, control, influence, accept.
That's awesome. And I think it's just because, like, especially millennials nowadays, it's like, I feel like there's always stuff in the way of you beginning and doing. And that's why I always like tell people, like, you need to have somebody really accountable for you and who has those interests in mind. I like how you brought up COVID because, you know, it's something that we're all dealing with now. And I think that, you know, we were talking about how quickly it does take for you to take something from idea to execution. So tell me a bit about Connector and COVID-19.ca.
Oh, yeah. I think I got inspired, honestly, by the Asian Hustle Network and yourself. I saw how we're talking, and I think there's such a common theme throughout this conversation, but it's like you see people do something, right? So that was you controlling what you could control with Lunchboxes with Love. And then that actually influenced me where I was like, hey, could I not do something else for Vancouver? And so I just posted a video. A few friends of mine, we got together. We launched a website within like 4 days, posted it. And we're like, hey, this website, we're going to meet emotional, physical, and spiritual needs in whatever way. And if you have a need, you submit it through our form and we'll see if we can help. Can't promise anything, but we'll do what we can. And then on the volunteer side, if you want to volunteer and lean into one of those, do it. Like join us, right?
Yeah.
And it was overwhelming. Because again, scared crapless about like, is anyone even going to join me in this? Am I going to be just vulnerable and like I'm going to be a loner? And 22 people and like within the first day signed up to be volunteers. Wow. And I think
what are they doing to volunteer?
They're doing grocery drop-offs. They're doing grocery pickups. So like the lines are pretty long nowadays. And if I'm like at home with children and elderly, right, it's tough. It's tough to get out there. And so some people are able, so we might just drop off grocery gift cards for them. And then for the people who aren't able, right, we do drop-offs where it's like, hey, here's some groceries for a few weeks. And toys. I think that was one thing that I didn't expect is the need for families, because they're all cooped up at home and so many people are working from home, moms and dads, they're like, you know what would really help me in this time is something to keep the kids busy.
Yeah.
It's so tough with 4 kids. Like one mom was like, it's so tough with 4 kids.
I can't even imagine with 1 kid.
Right? And so it's like, I'm typing away on my computer and like kids are yelling. And so 2 swing sets. I think that's one need that we have right now where someone's just like, hey, if we had a swing set, we'd throw the kids outside and they could just hang out there for like at least an hour or 2. Right. So that's Connector and COVID-19.ca.
So you would deem that as a success?
You know, honestly, if we had met even just one need, I think I would have counted that as a success. And I think the fact that they're starting to pile up now, it could scale very quickly. And I think that's just a matter of people either knowing about it or not, you know?
Yeah. And I think, first of all, that's remarkable. It's just like, I think that you have really taken everything that you've, again, I told you those building blocks, right? And then you've totally taken all of that and been like, all right, like, how can I contribute? And it's like having a place where people can contribute together. I think that is amazing. And I've seen a lot of that in LA, actually. I drove up to Santa Clarita, which is about like usually like an hour and a half from LA. And this man, he said, hey, our neighborhood has actually gotten closer after all this COVID-19 stuff is happening. We've been, going to grocery shop for each other and dropping things off. Like, I want to get 15 boxes of donuts and divide them all to my neighborhood to celebrate Easter.
That is so cool.
Yeah. And I thought, oh my God, yes, of course I'll drive up there, even though it's really far, even though it's gritty and it's raining and all of that. Like, the positivity and gratitude in today's world now, it's so compelling. And I think it's really because social media has given us this way to connect with people, again, tying in technology. Where do you see that COVID connector in COVID-19.ca? Where do you think that will go in the future? Hoping COVID's done very soon, but
Yeah. And I think it speaks to like not even just being okay with failure, but being okay with something ending. When you think about the Cartwheel project, it's over. It's been a long time since I've even thought about it until you brought it up. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's right. But like for that season, and for that period of time, right? How cool would it be if you made an impact in just some small way, right?
Yeah.
Not caring about how long it goes for, right? But being there to lean in for when it is happening, right?
Yeah.
So where Connect during COVID goes, maybe it ends tomorrow, and maybe all the volunteers are like, nah, there are no needs. I guess we're done, right? Because there is no Connect during COVID if there are no needs, right? And so I actually hope there isn't that moving forward, but for as long as the self-isolation thing happens, then we'll be here,
Well, I think it's remarkable that you've brought in a group of people that may have never even known each other, right? And these volunteers who are so willing to, number one, risk their health to go and grab something for somebody in need. I think that you're onto something pretty special. And that, to keep everybody in touch with each other, because these are good people and we need to, band together for whatever else that next thing is. Just as like an idea, because to find people who are like so giving and so wanting to help, it's really important to keep them close by and, to show that you appreciate them for what they've done. So I'm really glad that you started that in Vancouver. It's incredible. And just for you sharing your story with me today, I just wanted to thank you. I know you're all the way in Vancouver, but I think that, your projects are so inspiring. And especially during this time, it's great to talk with you. And if people want to find you, where can they find you? I can also leave that below as well.
Yeah. My Instagram handle is @JAYKIEW @JQ. Apart from that, nothing else formal. Or on Spotify, you can catch Millennials with Machetes. 2 L's, 2 N's. A lot of people are like, how do you spell millennials again? But yeah, Millennials with Machetes.
Because we're millennials. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. You've been listening to Short and Sweet, a Donut Princess podcast. My name is Maylee Tao. Let me know if there's anything you want to listen to or, any topics you want me to discuss. I'm here. And please review and subscribe below. So holla at your girl. Bye.